when it comes to misrepresenting history and making things seem like they're one thing when they definitely are another, there's only one thing you can say. It happens all the time. Having said that, let's get into the
We live in a
video.
divided world, dear viewer. It seems like even the most innocuous subjects or the most fundamental aspects of reality are now subject to constant debate and contention. And nowhere is that division more obvious than in the world of media, where every new movie and TV show becomes a battleground between warring factions, each determined to prove that they're in the right. But sometimes, just sometimes, a project comes along that's so monumentally, epically, and comprehensively terrible that it manages to unite the entire world in absolute contempt. It happened before with Santa Inc., a theoretical comedy made by two talentless, mean-spirited hacks posing as comedians who haven't actually produced anything remotely funny in more than a decade, which tried to use feminism and identity politics to attack the literal personification of goodwill and generosity at Christmas time, no less.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
And it seems to be happening again with the release of Queen Cleopatra, a Netflix documentary series produced by one of the least popular actresses in Hollywood, and that's saying something, believe me, centered around female African rulers throughout history. I mean, calling it a documentary is a bit like calling Inglourious Bastards a historically accurate depiction of World War II, but don't worry, we'll get back to that soon enough. Believe that. Anyway, the show kicked up a firestorm of controversy and backlash, earned itself the lowest rating that I've ever personally seen on Rotten Tomatoes, and even managed to get itself sued on behalf of the entire country of Egypt. Damn man, this thing's about as popular as the salad bar at Lizzo's birthday party.
Considering the fact that the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor was also banned, even though she probably looked closer to what Cleopatra looked like than any native Egyptian today, it's pretty obvious that they're not really banning them because of inaccuracy as much as they're banning them because they want the ancient Egyptians, including ones that were of Macedonian stock, to be played by Egyptians. You know, the Egyptians that don't look like the Macedonians. Not to mention banning vague cartoon visualizations of Egypt, and their reason being you shouldn't represent a prophet visually, which is fine, but all this proves to me is that Egypt is trigger happy when it comes to banning things, and so I don't think anyone should take it as a badge of shame when Egypt bans what you do. Again, they just ban everything that they slightly disagree with. They banned Kevin Hart for having an opinion on the fact that he thought that the ancient Egyptians were black. This guy's not even a scholar. He's not trying to push any message. All he's doing is coming there to do a comedy show, and he was just being funny. Maybe that was his real belief, but that does nothing to do with what he came to do. But they banned him. They canceled his show and banned him. What the hell? I didn't know that Egypt was this obsessed with accuracy, given some of the documentaries that have been made in their country that I will show later. But let us continue with the video.
So why are people so fucking mad about this thing anyway? Well, the main criticism centers around the recasting of Cleopatra. Sorry, reimagining, because I guess that's what we call it now when we blatantly try to rewrite verified historical facts to suit our own 21st century narrative and gaslight anyone who calls us out on our bullshit as hateful bigots.
Framing this as if the problem was reimagining or whatever is just a lie. Again, they banned the old version of Cleopatra. They didn't ban the 1999 one, but I think that just didn't air in their country. And keep in mind that the other three that I showed you, the Prince of Egypt and the two Cleopatras, they didn't mask themselves as documentaries, and they still were banned. So it has nothing to do with it being a documentary as much as it is stopping, well, I guess propaganda in their opinion.
Kind of like how the Woman King tried to reimagine a brutal expansionist military dictatorship who massacred entire communities and happily sold their own people into slavery as a progressive and enlightened society to be cherished and protected, and a unit of female warriors who once lost more than 500 troops to kill a grand total of 6 French soldiers as an elite fighting force that would make the Avengers shit themselves in absolute terror.
I think I can smell shite.
You know, there's a lot of people in history who have been given a sort of beautiful painting about who they are, when in real life they were bloodthirsty rapists who constantly enslaved and took over kingdoms with bloodshed, but are shown in a very sympathetic light when things are seen from their perspective. And again, I will repeat, rape, slavery, beheadings, all kinds of terrible things, not to mention the ones about Rome. How many Rome documentaries have there been out there where the portrayal is, it understates the vileness of what it was like being a slave or someone of peasantry stock living in those regions. If people are so concerned about depicting people as horribly as they really were, why don't we start by reimagining the Roman documentaries, then make them look like they were just like some really cool inventors? And of course, not to mention the fictional depictions, which tend to flow very deeply into misunderstandings of reality, of which I've heard no one complain about.
You know, it's always funny watching Hollywood activists combing the pages of history in search of some hidden truth that'll finally validate all their long-standing biases and personal hang-ups, and when they inevitably come up short, just kind of throwing up their hands and saying, fuck it, we'll just make it up instead. Sorry, reimagine it. The thing is, works of historical fiction like The Woman King, or Braveheart, or 300 generally get cut a bit of slack because, well, the clue's in the name. They're works of fiction. Yeah, fiction based on real events, very loosely in some cases, but fiction all the same. I'm not a huge fan of it myself because I know how many people can be misled by stuff like this, but hey, I also wasn't born yesterday. Real history is often muddy and complex and doesn't deliver the big, satisfying emotional payoffs that people expect from movies. Telling compelling stories that people want to see sometimes means bending and embellishing the truth.
It's kind of a contradiction to say that, oh, look at this Woman King movie that stretches the truth, and then say, actually, I don't care about stretching the truth when it comes to fiction. I mean, choose one. Are you for or against it? Because if you're for people stretching the truth in fiction, then why the hell did you even bring it up?
Documentaries are a very different beast though, because the whole point is to give the audience an accurate and unbiased insight into real events, backed up by facts and evidence from eyewitnesses and experts in the relevant fields. They're very...
I don't know when this guy was born, but the idea that all documentaries give accurate information is, let's just say, very far from the truth.
Their purpose is to separate fact from fiction and delve deeper into the actual reality behind the myths and commonly held beliefs.
Not all documentaries are created equal, especially ones that are a passion project by an actor or actress. Usually those do stray very far from the truth because they just pay to get their way.
And that's where Cleopatra runs into a spot of trouble, because the whole motivation of this show seems to be the exact opposite. It's there to bend and distort reality, to turn her into something she absolutely wasn't, in order to fit the narrative of the showrunners. See, the stated goal of the African Queens series is to shed light on important black female rulers throughout history, unknown and overlooked people who actually had a big impact on the world. As producer Jada Pinkett Smith said, we don't often get to see or hear stories about black queens, and that was really important for me, as well as for my daughter, and just for the community to be able to know those stories because there's tons of them. Fair play, Jada, I can totally get behind that one. After all, there's plenty of historical people and events that haven't had the mainstream attention that they deserve. The problem I suspect they ran into with this one is that female rulers of organised nation states in sub-Saharan Africa that had a major and lasting impact on world history are probably a bit thin on the grounds.
So the idea that queens in Africa are generally rare, who had some impact in their countries which rolled over into the world, is just ridiculous. Like, for example, Shaka Zulu's aunt, who was a kingmaker, who actually picked him to take over the crown and then killed him when he went out of control. Or the reign queens of, South Africa, who have constantly been selected and were making important decisions throughout the history of South Africa, which made it very difficult for the Europeans to penetrate. Or the Kandake, who won against the Roman army, who actually stopped their movement deep into Africa because they just couldn't penetrate, and they had to come up with a deal, in fact, including the fact that the Kandake came back with the head of a very important Roman official. And of course, to mention one more, what about Queen Nzinga, who literally controlled millions of men and was seen by the Europeans as almost as formidable as any other male ruler? And believe me, that's only a speck. There's literally like tens of queens that were written about all over. I mean, including the Queen of Sheba and all these other people who were written about, who I could mention. Some from the Nubian Empire. See, Africa is not the same as Europe. They weren't that obsessed with making sure that women never rule, at least not in the past.
And rather than dig deeper to find more obscure figures that might not have mainstream appeal, they just decided, fuck it, we'll just take Cleopatra and make her ours now.
Fuck.
Because everyone knows about Cleopatra, right? She's the kind of name that'll bring your series a lot of attention, and if you can somehow convince enough people that she was actually black all along, then you'll earn yourself a lot of praise from your big friends in Hollywood. Because after all, how do we really know what Cleopatra looked like? It's not like her Macedonian Greek heritage was a well-documented matter of verified historical record, or that we have countless portraits, statues, busts, friezes, and even coins with her face on them, all depicting her with classical Greek facial features. Oh wait.
This guy is right. Why depict a false impression of what someone would have looked like in their real life when we actually have statues and stuff like that of the guy? And as we know, Egyptologists would never misrepresent what ancient Egyptians look like. Okay, now do me a favor. Imagine what this man, Ramses III, would have looked like in his real life. Look at his skin color, look at his facial features, look at his youth, look at his power, his strength as a man. And then to ask yourself a question. If I were to reimagine what this guy would look like in his real life, how would I, visualize him? Well, let's see how National Geographic's visualized him.
He was the last of Egypt's great pharaohs. A warrior. A master strategist. 1153 BC, ancient Egypt. Ramses III arrives at his palace in Thebes for a huge celebration. He's led Egypt for 30 years and he's showing signs of wear and tear.
Now, I know this is nitpicky, so please don't exaggerate like what other people might in other documentaries. But clearly these people have the exact same skin color. But come on, bro. Their skin color is mildly different from one another. And of course, there's nothing about this guy's race or whatever that could suggest that there could be two completely different phenotypically, situated people, especially given the DNA results by, the Egyptologists that show that he had Black African heritage that was actually mildly different than Tutankhamun and the others. But I know what you're saying. How could they have ever guessed that this was a black person, besides the extremely dark skin and the countless statues of other Egyptian pharaohs being depicted as black? Well, the answer is it's easy to see white people in statues, but when you see black people, you have to always deny them. The idea of complaining about one stupid documentary when there's an entire field of Egyptology where they pretend that they're blind is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And of course, the fleshy lips, the broad noses, to them, this is not information. The reason why I don't give a crap about this documentary being inaccurate is because the entire field of Egyptology is based around pretending that they're blind.
But hey, maybe they've got some awesome new evidence that's just come to light, or compelling testimony from respected figures in their fields.
I imagine her to have curly hair like me and a similar skin colour.
I remember my grandmother saying to me, I don't care what they tell you in school, Cleopatra was black.
Well, if your senile old gran reckons that a Ptolemaic ruler born thousands of years before her lifetime was black, then I'm convinced.
Yes, I can definitely smell shite.
Speaking of senile old people having takes that are unbelievable, let's listen to what this top Egyptologist says about the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians.
Dark-skinned ancient Egyptians, but he says there's an explanation.
No, they were dark-skinned,
But they were not black.
But they're not Negro. Because look at the lips of the Negroes like that and the nose like this. It's not really the Egyptian origin at all. It's different, completely different.
That's an interesting take. So he says the lips of the ancient Egyptians don't reflect black people, while Egyptians like himself reflect what ancient Egyptians look like. So let's put them side by side and have a nice look at some founding fathers of ancient Egypt to see if their lips match his. It's strange how almost all the pharaohs of ancient Egypt have black African facial features that don't match any Egyptologist like Zahi Hawass, but they're so confident that the queen statue can clearly show that she's white, but these statues are somehow, these super vague, unbelievable statues that can never be detected.
But it really gives you an insight into the mindset of the showrunners on this one. The childly simplistic idea that if you choose to believe in something, then it just magically becomes the truth, even if all the evidence at your disposal says the exact opposites. It's the same reason that I'm not actually 200 feet tall and made out of solid gold. Shit man, even the Egyptians have gone to war against this thing. The head of the Supreme Council for Antiquities, Mustafa Waziri, said that calling Cleopatra black would be a falsification of Egyptian history, and that Netflix is trying to stir up confusion to spread false information that the origin of Egyptian civilization is black.
I'd love to see if that Egyptologist could look straight at this ancient Egyptian statue named Huni, which is a pharaoh, and say, absolutely, this person was not black. And of course, the countless others that I could easily list on here who have typically black African features. Let's be honest. The reason why Cleopatra's thing blew out of proportion is because there's a side in America that's obsessed with hating on black people. And then there's a side in Egypt that's obsessed with suppressing anything that goes against the idea that the Egyptians who are there today are not the original Egyptians. And judging on the images I have on the screen, in your honest opinion, do you really see like Middle Eastern people? Do you really see Europeans when you look at these statues? Tell that Egyptologist to shut up.
See, that's the problem with trying to appropriate an actual documented historical figure and pass off your bullshit wish fulfillment fantasy as a legit, unbiased documentary. You really have to provide receipts to back it up, and if
Here's what I'll say. I will admit that Cleopatra is white as soon as you admit that this pharaoh, Huni, is black. How about that for a deal?
the best you can come up with is, my gran told me to believe a comforting lie to make me feel better about myself, then funnily enough, people are going to push back against it. So how do you think the showrunners reacted to this backlash? Did they take this criticism on the chin, acknowledge the complaints, and apologise for any offence caused?
You serious?
Well, not really, no. Why shouldn't Cleopatra be a melanated sister? Series director Tina Garavi asks. And why do some people need Cleopatra to be white? Her proximity to whiteness seems to give her value, and for some Egyptians, it seems to really matter. No kidding, Tina. I suspect it does matter that you're trying to rewrite their own history for them and project 21st century American ideals onto something that you've got little or no understanding of.
If you're looking to right the wrongs of people who distort history and make it seem like something is real that isn't, and something that isn't real is, I think you'd want to start with the people who downplay slavery, the people who pretend that atrocities that happened all over Africa didn't happen the way they did. I mean, if you want to talk about disrespectful people who lie about what happened in different countries, I mean, I think there's bigger targets than some documentary. And maybe you want to go after the crowd of people who thinks that slavery shouldn't be taught because it muddies the mind of the modern individual. The black man making him feel like nothing more than a slave, and the white man making them feel like they're guilty for a crime that happened 100 years ago. You know, while we're talking about things that we want altered in order to make us feel better.
It's not just that I've directed a series that portrays Cleopatra as black, and that I've asked Egyptians to see themselves as Africans, and they're furious at me for that. I'm okay with this. Well, as long as you're okay with it, then I guess that's just fine. Never mind that you've insulted the cultural heritage of more than 100 million Egyptians and turned pretty much the entire internet against you and your shitty projects. The only
Okay, so what's wrong with this explanation that says I want Egyptians to see themselves as African? Aren't they African? Especially given the fact that they're like 10% black African DNA.
The thing that truly matters is what you want, what makes you happy, the truth that you choose to believe. You know, I'm trying to think of a phrase that best sums up this kind of mindset.
Sheer fucking hubris.
Nah, I've got nothing. So was Cleopatra black? We don't know for sure, but we can be certain that she wasn't white like Elizabeth Taylor. We need to have a conversation with ourselves about our colorism and the internalized white supremacy that Hollywood has indoctrinated us with.
Oh, come on!
See, I can tell what you're trying to do here. You're trying to equate two very different things in order to deflect the entire question away from yourself. So what if my supposed documentary that claims to be based on hard scientific facts is actually wildly inaccurate nonsense with no basis in reality? This fictional movie that I saw from half a century ago was also wrong, so that makes it totally okay. No, it doesn't. John Wayne playing Genghis Khan in The Conqueror was also ridiculous Hollywood nonsense from a different era of filmmaking, but if you tried to make a factual documentary now claiming that Genghis Khan was actually a black man because we don't know for sure what he actually looked like, then you'd rightfully piss off the whole of Mongolia in the process.
I love the fact that he pretends that the only depiction of Cleopatra as a white person is from, you know, the 60s, when there's literally a mini-series from 1999. And of course I show that documentary of Ramesses, which paints him as like the whitest. Dude, come on. Let's be honest. The reason why people don't care about the other one is because they don't mind them being that white in, Eurocentric circles. But like I said, the Egyptians banned the white ones because they don't want Cleopatra to be white either. They want Cleopatra to be Egyptian, even though she was white. She was Greek. What in the world? And of course, maybe she was mixed with some Middle Eastern people. But then at that point, you've chucked in a lot of information that you're just making up based on those statues. She looks like a white person. Why are you pretending like she's anything else than that, with no evidence?
The point I'm making here is that nobody's buying the bullshit you're desperately trying to sell them, and you don't just get to use racism as a magical shield to deflect any criticism that comes your way. The fact is, you made something that you knew was a lie, that you tried to pass off as the truth, because you exist in the kind of bubble where everyone's fantasy becomes their own unique reality and nobody questions it, and so you just assume that the rest of the world thinks the same way. And when you got the hard reality check that you absolutely deserved, you fell back on the same tired excuses that get rolled out anytime a lazy race-swapped Hollywood production comes under fire. It didn't work back then, and it's certainly not going to work for you now.
Race swapping has worked multiple times in the past. I mean, think about the zombies who used to be a depiction in Hollywood as black Africans who were cursed by voodoo, and then they, started doing, zombie shit. But now there's no more black zombies ever. They're all depicted as white. I mean, maybe that's not a one-to-one comparison, but it seems like Hollywood has never cared about switching races and turning people over. They've done it several times, actually.
But hey, maybe Cleopatra can serve as a lesson for future generations of documentary makers, that what we want to be true is often very different from what's actually true, and if you can't deal with that, then maybe you shouldn't be making them in the first place. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Anyway, now that video is done attacking easy targets, I wonder if they would ever respond to a difficult target like Egyptology in its realist sense, or even addressing the facial imagery of the ancient Egyptians who look like black people. Will they just deny that that's how they look like? I mean, they usually do.